Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to the first ever episode of the academic year 2023-2024 of What I See from VinUni Research Club. So we're coming back this academic year with a brand new theme about research, where we are exploring different facets of this colorful journey across the researching field. So with us today, we have the Laurent El Ghaoui from the College of Engineering and Computer Sciences. So could you please first introduce yourself to our audience?
Yes, and thank you for the opportunity. So my name is Laurent El Ghaoui. I spent more than 2 decades at UC Berkeley as a rank and file professor doing research and teaching. And 2 years ago, I joined VinUni as a dean. Yeah.
Yes. So thank you so much for joining us today, first of all. And also, my name is Quỳnh Lam, and I'm a second year medical student from CHS, and I will be your host for today. So we have comprised a series of questions from our VinUni Research Club members, and they would like to learn more about the experience of what it's like doing actual research and how do you balance it with everyday activities in your life. So we would like to start it off with some casual questions first. So how do you often start your day as a researcher?
I don't start my day as a researcher because I do seldom direct research anymore. But when I was actively involved in the front lines of the research, I would just probably read some articles or, get up to date on that one. And most of the time would be about meeting with students who are in the research and training them.
So it's mostly about communicating the research to the students who are actually involved?
Yes, there's a strong element in research which is about communication, and but also project management is a very important skill in research because usually you have a team of people, you have to coordinate them, and that is a skill that usually is not taught to researchers per se. They learn it on the go.
That's true. Yes. So if you count that interpersonal skill set and the amount of work that you have to do contributing to the research, how many hours would you say that take up per week or per day?
It's hard for me to quantify, but basically what I felt over these decades of doing research is that it's always on. So you're never letting down, or even during vacation. It's very time consuming, absorbing, but because there's a passion there. And I think if you're involved into a research project, you see the outcomes in terms maybe a publication or a code or something. It's really satisfying.
I see. So when you say research is a lifelong experience, it really means it's a lifelong experience, really. And if so, then what would research mean to you personally? And how would you define research?
So it's a broad question, but I'll narrow it down to a few items that come to my mind. One is that I was under the impression, maybe coming from fields that are quite mathematical, that research is about being a genius or being very smart and doing this and that and knowing so much and so on. Actually, my experience is that it's more, you're toiling the soil. There is new ideas all over. It comes naturally to human beings. There's nothing to be genius about. Of course, there's a lot of things like Nobel Prizes and so on that give you the impression that it's about being very smart. But no, research is really rooted in our human experience. You go in the mountains of Vietnam and you look at ethnic minorities, they do research as well. They just don't call it that way. But there is an inquiry process and a learning process all the time. So one of the things I came away with is that, it's just a beautiful work. It's not a matter of being a genius.
Thank you so much. I actually kind of resonate a lot with that answer, because a lot of people told me if you do research, then you have to be brighter, and then you have to have that kind of mindset that set you apart from others, basically. But I think it's kind of not true. in a sense that everyone has questions, everyone has inquiries that they want to answer,
Yeah.
and they want to pursue as well. Whether or not it's like whether or not it's like a small question or a really big one, that's challenging, right? So it's one thing that I found very an unexpected aspect of research for me is that how ubiquitous it is, if that makes sense.
Yes.
How everyone can do research without calling it formal research.
Exactly. It's just a very strange period of time in our societies where the term research, you can see it almost as a bloated enterprise. There's millions of researchers all over. And that's the second item I wanted to mention what research means to me. I think what I find very meaningful is when research does have impact, you really have to look for that. So there is the impact in a narrow sense when you publish something and it makes a lot of noise in the community and you're recognized. That's one thing, but then there is the impact of, maybe you invent the wheel and that has an impact. So what I came out with this is the idea that because research topics are everywhere and very interesting things emerge from a lot of situations, engaging in consulting projects with industry, I've found a great source of research ideas, of research topics, and so on. So if I were to encourage or promote something, and that's what we're trying to do here at VinUni, is this idea of research that's really applied and impactful. That's what the hope is.
I see. So it's more about making an actual impact.
Yes.
Yes.
And of course, all sorts of definitions about that. But I also want to mention that the research environment I started with, it's in a very old time before the beginning of this millennium. The situation was very different from now. Now research in some domains, let's say AI, is dominated by a few big corporate players, and they have an immense megaphone and they impose some kind of view or discourse. And to me, I would be very distraught by this environment as a young researcher, having to do a lot of self-promotion and so on. It seemed more natural before, easier. The crowds were smaller. The top conference I used to go to, it's called NeurIPS now. There used to be 600 people. Now there's 14,000.
14,000.
So it's like a different world, and I'm not sure I'm really understanding where it's going.
That's true. So you mentioned to me that when you first started research, the environment was much more different.
Yeah.
So upon the transition to the current state of research right now, were there any unexpected experiences that you encountered that was memorable to you?
I think there's always experiences that relate to the competition. And so to exist in that domain, it's also some kind of star system in a way, with all sorts of rankings and so on. So among those experiences, I've felt that sometimes you're really competing against another group, even though you think you're not, but you are, and there might be, theft and so on and so forth. All these things, in my view, are just the cost of doing business, I guess. It's the way it is.
That's true. So now that you talk about the competition and the tension between the different groups that they have to have the sense that they have to compete against one another, then could you share some practical advice on how do you maintain the integrity and the core nature of research, especially in cases where you face with unforeseen dilemmas in your research?
It's a deep ethical question. I would just say, in this day and age, and I'm trying to take the viewpoint of Vietnam. I think those issues are really, you have to have some kind of vision of what you're trying to achieve with an ambitious goal and even though if you fail in that goal, it doesn't matter. The idea of being guided by a bigger goal, maybe you want to solve problems related to dengue fever, for example, in Vietnam. So it's a recurring issue. How you solve it is probably unsolvable. You know, like you cannot really solve the problem, but having that goal is really, to me, the way to guide your ethics. And so that's one thing. I also want to mention that I think you have to, coming back to Vietnam, to think about what research is in like the developed countries, fully developed countries, and what is the notion of a meaningful research in Vietnam. And that's where I find this place to be super interesting because, you know, in the West, the research, sometimes you think of it as a tree and the branches narrow. And the relevance of much of the research, including my own, diminishes as you're trying to become more specialized, or you tackle problems of the future, like quantum computing. So it will happen in 10 years. And so there's a whole area which is more, I call it integrated research, where you really not looking at a very deep dimension of a very specific topic where, you know, the results will be in 20 years from now, but rather you work on projects that I call them all-in-one, which includes business, health, science, engineering. And so as an advice to researchers, I would say look for places where you can communicate with other point of view, rather than just narrowing down to the latest genomic exploit or something like that. I think, yeah.
I think I get your point quite clearly, because a lot of times there are a lot of papers that are influential, but they are not, how do I say this? It's not accessible to the public. So when the public read it, they don't understand the terminologies, they don't understand the point they're trying to get across. And there's also the dilemma of falling down into the rabbit hole as well, because you get too specialized in your field of research that you kind of don't see the other points of views. And I think it's a very, kind of like a very dangerous dilemma of research. And I think that you being here, being an educator, that you are spreading the passion for actual research for the students is actually a very meaningful thing. So thank you for that as well.
You're welcome. I hope I do, but I think it's also the passion of the students, including your research club, and that really is very admirable. And I think, yes, we're discussing here the idea of accessible research. What that means, it's some flaw I saw in the Western system of research, which corresponds to siloed disciplines and very highly expert in one domain, very narrowly defined, and then, you know, sometimes there is a elephant in the room that they don't see.
That's true.
For example, one of the sobering experiences I had was in a research project to understand that, okay, I could work on very fancy mathematical model about optimizing this energy and that one. And at the end of the day, it just didn't matter because the constraints in practice made it so that only a simple thing could work, could be implemented. So I think if you just do your research and at the end of that process you ask yourself, oh, by the way, am I going to be able to implement it? That's the wrong way. And so I think that at the start of a project, you should involve all the aspects of a potential translation into the real world.
I see. So you base your research on the empirical world.
Okay, you raise indeed an implied criticism that what I advocate for would be killing the idea of theoretical physics, for example.
Trust me.
No, I'm taking your words and pushing them into
playing
an
the
extreme.
devil's advocate.
Yes.
Yes.
So it's true. but so what? Maybe it's the phase we should be in, and especially a developed country should not think about the abstract notions of, for example, there's a theme in my field of, say, computer science, which is about, they call it complexity. So it's a method to evaluate how hard it is to solve a problem, for example. And it's super theoretical, and it led to many very respected and, by the way, amazing, mathematically amazing work. But today we can see it doesn't matter. ChatGPT is not concerned at all by this thing, and so
It's true.
In place of that notion of complexity, we have a better notion, more empirical, which is how much energy it consumes, and how can you optimize that. So there's a change of gears, and sometimes you have to let go of entire bodies of knowledge, and they go to the history shelves.
History shelves. But that's, I think, is also an important thing, that you educate the people about the history of research as well.
Yes, that's quite interesting. We mentioned before the idea that, societies have always invented and devised new scientific knowledge. For example, there's organized systems of knowledge in medicine dating back thousands of years. To get there must have been a process of scientific inquiry, testing, and so on.
That's true.
We just lost that, but yeah.
So, I think to do research on top of being an educator as well, so you have to be very mindful of the different buckets involved in the field of research, basically. So how exactly do you balance your life between a researcher and an educator? Are those two jobs kind of diffused together?
Yes, it's quite a passion of mine. An amazement of how teaching even the most so-called basic topic to a bunch of attentive young minds actually brings you ideas that have never been explored. So it's this notion that the research field is a vast landscape where you just dive a little bit and you find new soil. It's amazing. So I'm teaching this class about linear algebra. It's a very old topic, which is quite relevant, but each time I teach, I get some insight. Oh, there's this question, so this could be a research topic. Has it been explored? No. Amazing. So that's the mystery.
Yes, so you're looking for the loopholes. Well, not the loopholes, I reckon, but yes. So you're looking for the spaces that to grow, basically.
Yes. And they abound.
I see. So, because you mentioned linear algebra, so we have known that you are actually having I think you had a contest to design the cover for your linear algebra and application textbook.
Yes.
Yes. Can you elaborate on that project a little bit? Is it? I heard it's an open textbook. So to publish an open textbook, what kind of work or what kind of research work do you have to put into in order for it to be a successful?
Okay. Before answering you, I'll clarify that it's actually, the term open is a bit misleading. What it is a hypertext. So it's really a web-based object. So it's a bunch of web pages. It's organized around a body of knowledge called linear algebra.
I see.
And it follows this, I think people don't realize how much, the web as a way to organize knowledge is really very different. You see, in the early ages of internet, they conceived the web more like Wikipedia, much more organized and structured. And something happened and the structure went away, and now it's an explosion of things.
That's true.
But originally it was more like what this textbook is, which is a hierarchical organization. A book is a linear organization. This is more like a 2D organization where you can navigate and so on. I won't expand too much on this, but then I forgot your question.
Yes, no problem. I would just like to ask, like, what are the research work involved in the publishing of such a textbook? So,
Yes, it's and by the way, some VinUni students participated in this, where we, when you teach linear algebra the classical way, it's a very venerable math topic that underlines, or rather powers, things like a Google search engine. Okay, so that body of knowledge is very useful. But traditionally, they describe the essentially the theory of it and give some baby example, very toy example. But what our ambition was to provide more actual examples, like the Google search engine. And so the research here is to search where that technology is used. And so, for example, last week I learned from a colleague that this linear algebra was what is underlying when you do a test of your genetic makeup, your ancestry, things like, I don't know the name of this company, but you can take a blood sample, and then you know that your ancestor comes from this part.
Yes, like a gene toolkit, right?
Yes, exactly. There is a very strong linear algebra technology underlying this analysis, yes.
Really?
So the idea now is to take that information and condense into a summarized form, palatable for a non-expert in genetic and a non-expert in linear algebra. That's the challenge.
I see. So once again, it comes back to the question of accessibility, right? So you compress the knowledge in order for it to become more accessible to the people who are not specialized in the field. So I think it's actually a very good idea, and it's a very good way to kind of organize the knowledge that you found into a more compact of a way, because like you said, the internet used to have a structure, right? But now it's all gone away. It's all explosion of knowledge. And you can get easily caught up into the whirlpool of knowledge, that you fall into the rabbit hole and there's no way of getting up, basically.
Exactly.
So it's like,
in the doctor's area, you would love to have a system, and I think it's going to actually happen very soon with technologies like large language models, that this condensation for a non-expert, or this condensation at different levels of expertise, will be more or less automated. So, for example, right now, when you talk to a doctor, they might tell you about your disease or whatever in technical terms that you don't really understand. What is this term about and what do they mean? And they seem very genius to know all that knowledge, and I don't understand. So actually very good doctors are able to do that expression, but soon enough I think machines will help condensing information in a more palatable way. And this will revolutionize research, because as a researcher, that's another thing. I remember in a field called computational linguistics, basically large language models and stuff, I was trying to follow. And on this preprint archive, very well known, about 200 new papers a week.
200 newspapers.
So I cannot read 200 papers a week. That would be idiotic. So, but I would love to have a summary. And so this will happen, like where NLP is used to condense the results of research.
I see. So you told me you've been in research for more than 20 years, right? So I think a lot has happened. The transitions of research itself, the impact of technology, the impact of social media, in fact. And I think the changing mindset of people regarding research as well. Like you said, the bloated definition of what research is meant to be, even though it's so ubiquitous, right? But if you were given a chance, for example, to return to 20 years ago when you first met you, who just started doing research, what would you say to him?
To a beginner?
Yes, or to beginner, or to you, or to 20
myself,
years ago.
To myself. Maybe I would be a little more cognizant of the human aspects in research, the need to be more I would say political. I wasn't very aware of, conscious of, you know, you need to take care of these social aspects of within the research community and so on. So I also felt that maybe in terms of trajectory, I went from one topic to the next and never really pushed to to its maybe a conclusion some of these topics that I dabbled into. So,
I see.
but it's always a drawback. So if you're too political, for example, you lack substance, and if you're just focusing on one topic all your life, you narrow yourself. So it's a matter of trade-off. I don't regret, but I think I could have done a better job, of course.
That's true. Thank you so much for the advice and the experiences. I'm sure a lot of people who are wanting to pursue research and also who are interested in research just generally, they'll be really encouraged by your words as well. Because I feel like this is a very personal experience, right? And it's also, I think we are always learning as people.
Yes.
So, and then me 20 years from now would have said different things about me now. So I think what matters is that we don't stop learning. And at the end, research is everywhere, right? Yeah. So you want to pursue it as a novel topic that wants to contribute meaningfully to basically the community around you as well, in a sense, right?
Yes.
That's what the VRC is for, am I right, fellas? So, yes, but thank you so much for your experiences and words today, and for spending the afternoon with us here as well. And so I think that's the last question, was the conclusion to our first episode. And personally, for me, I have learned a lot. So I hope that our audience also retains some of the useful words and the useful experiences that was talked about during this podcast episode. And if you have any question or contacts, we are here as VRC, VinUni Research Club. And thank you so much again, Professor. And we will VRC you on the next episode.
Can I have just concluding words?
Yes.
Just to say, no, not bad at all. Just to say that I encourage young people to do research. We discussed the fact that it's not something to be seen as the province of just very special minds. But I also want to say that we're going to have a very interesting workshop on the December 20th at VinUni on environmental intelligence. You can look for Center for Environmental Intelligence, and there you'll see what this idea of projects that involve all sides of a problem, from business to engineering to etc. And so I hope you can join us that day.
Yes, definitely. Thank you guys so much. And thank you for the invitation as well. So that concludes the episode for today. And we will VRC you on the next episode.